4. Key dimensions of systems thinking competence. Systems thinking competence encompasses a range of cognitive, analytical, and behavioral capabilities that allow global leaders to navigate complexity in design, adaptive, sustainable solutions. The following 5 dimensions represent the essential pillars of this competency. 4.1 Holistic perspective. Global leaders with systems thinking competence transcend organizational and disciplinary silos. They integrate economic, social, environmental, and cultural considerations into strategic decision-making, recognizing that these dimensions interact continuously. For example, a CEO expanding into a developing market assesses not only financial profitability, but also the implications for community, well-being, labor conditions, and ecological sustainability. 4.2 Pattern recognition and causal mapping. Systems thinkers identify recurring patterns and visualize interconnections using analytical tools such as causal loop diagrams, system maps, and scenario modeling. These instruments reveal how variables interact and influence one another over time. By recognizing feedback structures and delays, leaders can move beyond symptomatic fixes that address surface-level issues and instead pursue structural interventions, targeting root causes. 4.3 Feedback sensitivity. At the core of systems thinking lies the awareness of feedback loops, both positive reinforcing and negative balancing. Leaders who understand feedback dynamics can anticipate unintended consequences and maintain equilibrium within their organizations. 4.4 Multi-level governance awareness. In global governance and policy contexts, systems thinkers perceive the interdependence of decision-making across scales: local, national, regional, and international. They apply multi-level governance (MLG) logic. Local innovations can inform global frameworks, while global norms can empower local adaptation. Such awareness fosters policy, coherence, partnership, and vertical alignment of goals. 4.5 Adaptive learning. Systems thinking is inherently dynamic and grounded in continuous learning. Effective leaders institutionalize learning cycles, plan, act, observe, reflect, revise, to refine strategies in response to evolving contexts. 5. Applications in practice. Systems thinking is most powerful when translated from theory into practice. Across sectors, corporate strategy, public governance, and international development, it provides leaders with the frameworks to design integrated, adaptive, and sustainable systems rather than fragmented solutions. 5.1 Corporate strategy. In the private sector, leading firms such as Unilever and Patagonia exemplify systems-oriented strategy. They view supply chains as interconnected ecosystems that encompass raw material, sourcing, labor welfare, logistics, consumer behavior, and post-consumption impact. By mapping these relationships, corporate leaders recognize that long-term profitability depends not only on cost efficiency, but also on the resilience of social and environmental systems. For example, Unilever's Sustainable Living Plan integrates sustainability metrics into every stage of production and distribution, demonstrating how profit and purpose can reinforce one another. Patagonia's regenerative business model likewise illustrates that protecting ecosystems enhances brand trust and long-term market value. 5.2 Public governance. In the public domain, systems thinking underpins whole-of-government and policy coherence approaches. Complex policy issues such as energy transition, public health, or urban development cannot be solved within single departments. The European Union's Green Deal serves as a prime example. It links energy, agriculture, transport, and finance through a comprehensive systemic framework that aims for climate neutrality by 2050 by coordinating multiple policy instruments and stakeholders. Systems-oriented governance ensures that progress in one sector does not undermine goals in another. 5.3 International development. Global development institutions such as the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and the World Bank increasingly adopt systems mapping to address wicked problems. Rather than implementing isolated interventions, they construct adaptive ecosystems where education, healthcare, and infrastructure reforms are mutually reinforcing. For instance, improving access to education enhances health outcomes and economic participation, which in turn strengthen governance and poverty reduction. Systems thinking thus transforms fragmented aid projects into synergistic networks of development. 6. Relationship with other global leadership competencies. Systems thinking integrates and amplifies other global leadership competencies. Cultural intelligence CQ systems thinkers understand that cultural norms are part of social systems shaping behavior. Strategic vision systems mapping enhances foresight by revealing long-term trajectories, adaptability, and agility. Recognizing feedback loops allows flexible responses to changing conditions. Ethical integrity, systemic awareness, underscores moral responsibility for distant consequences, e.g., supply chain labor or environmental externalities. Effective communication systems thinkers translate complexity into accessible narratives for diverse stakeholders. 6. Relationship with other global leadership competencies. Systems thinking functions as an integrative framework that strengthens and amplifies other global leadership competencies. Cultural intelligence CQ systems thinkers perceive cultural norms as integral components of larger social systems that shape collective behavior and organizational dynamics. Strategic vision systems mapping enhances foresight by revealing long-term trajectories and interdependencies, enabling leaders to anticipate complex ripple effects. Adaptability and agility. Awareness of feedback loops fosters flexibility, allowing leaders to adjust strategies in response to evolving global conditions. Ethical integrity, systemic awareness, reinforces moral responsibility for distant and indirect consequences, such as supply chain labor conditions or environmental impacts. Effective communication systems. Thinkers translate complexity into accessible narratives, helping diverse stakeholders grasp systemic issues and collaborate toward shared goals. 7. Barriers to developing systems thinking. Despite its strategic value, the development of systems thinking in global leadership faces several persistent obstacles: cognitive bias and reductionism. Many leaders are conditioned to pursue linear, immediate solutions, rather than exploring the dynamic interconnections among variables. Organizational silos, hierarchical and compartmentalized structures restrict cross-departmental dialogue, impeding holistic analysis. Short-termism market and political pressures for quarterly results discourage systemic, long-term problem-solving. Information overload. The complexity of global systems produces massive data flows, making it difficult to identify meaningful patterns without digital or analytical tools. Overcoming these barriers requires intentional leadership development that nurtures curiosity, reflective learning, and interdisciplinary collaboration, fostering a mindset attuned to systemic complexity and adaptive innovation. 8. Developing systems, thinking training, and tools. Organizations can cultivate systems thinking by embedding structured learning, processes, and analytical tools into leadership development. Systems mapping workshops enable visualization of interactions among policies, markets, and social outcomes, fostering holistic insight. Scenario planning tests alternative futures to uncover systemic dependencies and strategic leverage points. Design thinking integration merges empathy-driven innovation with systemic analysis to generate sustainable solutions. Feedback culture institutionalizes debriefs and double-loop learning. Argyris and Schern, 1978, encouraging reflection on underlying assumptions. Digital simulation tools employ AI and big data analytics to model global supply chains, policy networks, or climate systems. Educationally, leadership programs such as MIT's Learning Organization framework and the EU's Systems Innovation approach emphasize experiential learning that mirrors real-world complexity and adaptive problem-solving. 9. Ethical and philosophical dimensions. Systems thinking embodies a moral evolution from individual responsibility towards systemic stewardship. Global leaders guided by this ethos recognize that their decisions reverberate across ecological, social, and economic systems. They therefore assume accountability not only for organizational outcomes, but also for their broader impact on climate stability, societal equity, and human dignity. This ethical stance reflects a relational ontology, the understanding that human well-being arises from networks of interdependence rather than isolated action. Leadership, in this view, transcends control or competition and becomes an act of cultivating balance, reciprocity, and harmony within living systems. By aligning moral responsibility with systemic awareness, leaders advance a form of ethics grounded in sustainability, inclusivity, and collective flourishing. 10. Conclusion. Systems thinking transforms global leadership from a reactive practice into an anticipatory, integrative, and ethical endeavor. Leaders who master this competency transcend fragmented problem solving and embrace the complexity of global interconnection. They recognize that sustainability, equity, and innovation are systemic properties, not isolated achievements. In essence, systems thinking enables global leaders to perceive the world as an evolving ecosystem of relationships, one in which every decision reverberates across the whole, demanding wisdom, humility, and collective foresight.